Redos are something that people don't get in life, even if it's a life filled with regrets. That's why if there was a next time, this time it would be best to try to live without regrets. A young boy and girl were seen on their knees, frantically begging a scary man with dark, spiked hair for help. The people around were chattering to themselves, and believed that the children were being bullied by the male, or being forced to do dogeza, an expression of extreme humility by bowing all the way and making a request. However, this was not the case. This man was someone known as a transmigrator, someone whose soul had traveled to another body. At least, that's what he believed. He thought this way since he would periodically recall memories from his past life, and this world seemed to greatly resemble the setting of the super popular game called Bright Fantasy, that he bought after watching his friend play it. But he never actually played it himself, which meant he didn't have much knowledge of the game. All he knew was that the game was a command-style RPG and there were many heroines, with a person's choices leading them to marrying one of them. This bright world was a world of sword and sorcery, and the name of the protagonist was Isekai'd by default. However, the man that the children were begging to was named Gray. Because he had a mean look, he was often mistaken for a thug, since it seemed he was reincarnated as an evil background character. At least, that's what he believed. Staring down at the bowing children, Gray's sweat dropped and thought about what to do. He didn't know his role in the game, so he decided to just be an adventurer and go to the guild daily to accept and resolve numerous quests. Adventurers have rankings, advancing from D to A, while each rank also had a minus and a plus, meaning there could be D-, D, and D+. There were predetermined trials to rank up, and there were also rules, but Gray didn't pay much mind as he diligently ranked up due to his skills in various types of magic and swordsmanship. Gray was now a B-rank adventurer who could hold his head high anywhere, but he wasn't too happy with the fact that these kids were bowing to him and making the others think even more that they were being harmed in any way. The dark-haired male shifted his head to stare at the bystanders, scaring them, until he looked back at the kids who seemed to still be begging to heal their sick family member with his magic. But how did it come to this? Earlier, the children were out in the street trying to sell flowers to people, but they ran into someone who didn't appreciate their efforts and kicked at the kids with a disrespectful attitude. Immediately, Gray came to their rescue and kicked this guy in the face, knocking him out, before Gray proceeded to heal the kids and said that he would buy a flower from them. Once Gray remembered what he did for them, the dark-haired male asked if it was their parents or siblings, but they said it was neither. They explained that they didn't have parents or a real family, and it was one of their friends who was sick. And Gray felt conflicted on what to do, since recovery magic could heal injuries, while curative magic was only used by church priests. They were still bowing, so Gray decided that he would try to help even if he wasn't sure if he could. But he was hoping that the potions on him would help. The boy was about to say something about payment, likely about to say that they didn't have anything, but Gray said that they could pay him back whenever they could. The two started to cry, startling Gray, as they explained that it was because an adult was nice to them for once, making Gray feel like he had to cure them no matter what. They started to walk through the streets, and Gray introduced himself to the kids, to which the children did so back, as the shorter boy said that he was Isekai'd, and the girl was Fio. Gray immediately recognized the name, and knew that this boy was the world's protagonist. In the case of being reborn as a villain, if you proceed according to the story, you will die. Usually, the story was about avoiding the main character as much as possible. But since Gray didn't know anything, there was only one thing that he could do: act according to the directions of his conscience, aka randomly. Even if getting involved with the protagonist led to his death, that wasn't a reason to not help these children. It wasn't that he wanted to die, but he just didn't want to live regretting not doing what he could. They eventually arrived, and Isekai'd walked inside the building to explain everything, leaving Gray and Fio to themselves. The girl started to speak and bowed again, thanking Gray once more. But Gray wanted her to thank him after he had helped their family, as he could just turn out to be a bad guy who was planning to take their whole family and sell them as slaves or something. Despite that scary thought, the girl still felt touched by the fact that he listened to what they had to say. But if he really were a bad person, he wouldn't say such things. Gray looked at the child and believed her to be naive, but he was happy that she trusted him at all. However, his scary face made the girl think that she had upset him. He reassured her that he was just thinking about something, making her smile with relief. Gray wondered if he really looked that upset, but that wouldn't be the first time he heard this, since that was just the kind of face he had. Isekai'd opened the door and invited Gray in to show him their sick family member, to which he said that he would do all that he could. Another girl introduced herself as Aria, and said that the others were Nina and Lutz, while the sleeping one was Stella. A closer look made Gray notice something as he asked the color of the girl's eyes, learning that they were red, which confirmed his suspicions that Stella was a vampire. The girl was likely a half-blood, and Gray wondered if the others knew that the girl had vampire blood in her. explaining to the others that she was just malnourished. The dark-haired male knew that vampires felt bloodthirst when they didn't get enough nutrients, but Stella hadn't been attacking the others, so he believed it was a simple solution to getting some food. He asked the others what they would usually eat, but there really wasn't much. So Gray decided that he was going to provide the kids with food for a month. They felt hesitant, but Gray insisted that it was the only solution. So the kids thanked him for the help as he walked out in the direction of the market. If he abandoned those kids, he would definitely regret it. Gray started to grin evilly and thought about how he was going to have the kids to be sacrificed for his self-satisfaction. But he was ultimately thinking in a caring manner about them. Eventually, he seemed to run into a bunch of other thugs who tried to be friendly with him, and asked if he also got an eye on the kids in the shack. Gray grabbed the bald male's wrist and popped the bone, before slamming his face into the ground, proceeding to beat up the others as he told them that he would feed them to the harpies if they ever laid hands on the kids in the shack. They were scared by Gray's faces, and Gray asked why they were bothering him, to which they explained they thought Gray was like them, making him slam the thug's face into the ground once more. He walked off back to the city of Bastoke, a city along the route that ran from the capital to another country. There was an adventurers guild with plenty of quests, and this city was an easy one to live in for career adventurers like Gray. However, the large population caused many thugs and criminals to exist. He went around and started to buy groceries for the kids, feeling glad that he could afford to take care of the meals, since he would always get all the rewards to himself from missions. He would get the rewards because he didn't have a team, but he would try to convince himself that it was not because no one wanted to team up with him. Gray arrived back at the shack and said it was time to cook, surprising them as Aria said that she would start a fire. Lutz would stare in silence, and Fio told Nina and Lutz to wait with her, making Gray glad that they were all well behaved. They started the recipe, and he was surprised by how the kids could manage easy recipes. Glancing down to see Nina drooling, he wiped her mouth and the child called him Dad, making him not know what to do or if he should deny it. But Aria told the girl to not bother him. Eventually, dinner was ready, and Gray wound up eating with the kids, who realized how delicious the food was. Gray would wipe the mouth of Nina once again along with Lutz, to which Nina thanked him while calling him Dad again. It seemed Stella was now awake, and Aria started to spoon-feed the child, making everyone happy about the situation. They all told the dark-haired male that he could leave the cleanup to them, and they all thanked him for the meal, to which he thought about how there was no need to be formal with him, but he knew that would change with time. Gray decided that it was time for him to go home, but Nina jumped on him and gave him a tattered doll, confusing him as Aria tried to take the clingy child away from the male. The dark-haired male said that it was fine since she was just a toddler, and that he could stay until it was her bedtime, thinking that he should just do what he could so he didn't live with regrets. He remembered his past life when his family all left him in the house by himself, seemingly the final words he heard before he was sent to this world. The next morning he bought more groceries, and chuckled with an evil smile about how he would eventually give the children some quality meat when the timing was right. He brought the food to them and gave them some papers that were recipes and menu ideas, explaining that he wouldn't be coming every day so they could use them as references. Aria suggested that the male came to take a look at the younger children, making him feel content with how well they slept. Aria and the others were happy that Gray slept well, despite the tantrum that Nina threw, and they all waved goodbye as Gray was ready to go off to make some more money, already having a plan ready. Later, an elder orc would be seen running through the forest frantically, while thinking about getting away from something it couldn't win against. Normally, humans were just livestock to orcs, but all of the elder orc's underlings were killed by just one human, the same human that it was now running from. Gray sliced through the trees with an evil grin, and kept trying to swing at the elder orc's crotch area, confusing the monster greatly, as Gray told it that there was something he wanted to buy, for which he needed some certain body parts to get said item with. A little while earlier, Gray was at the Bastoke Adventurers Guild commission board, looking for a job to do for some money that day. He found a quest that was to exterminate an elder orc, but he seemed to overhear other people in the guild making up rumors about the male, such as a lie where he committed every crime, but that was obviously not true. If it were true, his adventurer's license would have been revoked a long time ago. Suddenly, a man named Ganzus walked up to Gray and tried to bother the dark-haired male, something that Gray was not too pleased about. Ganzus, who is the Blood Axe party leader, believed that Gray was planning something with the kids of the slums, and supposedly felt pain about the fact a person like Gray was of the same rank as him. Gray responded by telling the taller male that he seemed to have gotten full of himself after reaching B rank, even though it was 3 years after him, proceeding to say even more insulting words, which caused Ganzus to try and attack the dark-haired male, but there were people to stop him. The people in the guild were ready to see the fight even if it wasn't happening, especially since they knew that Gray would win. Gray walked up to the desk and told Sasha, the receptionist, that he was taking the quest. She told him to at least wait till after he registered to deal with Ganzus, but he said that the male started it all on his own. She looked at the quest and explained it was from a village outside of Bestoke. However, it didn't pay too much since the people were poor. Sasha asked if he was going to join a party, but he refused, since no one would let him join even if he wanted to, proceeding to math out how to finish the job quickly to feed Isuka and the others. His thoughts were interrupted by Sasha thanking him and saying that not a single person among the guild staff believed the rumors about him, surprising him with how out of the blue it was. It wasn't like he was being a philanthropist, he was only doing the quest mainly because there was a chance to gain benefits besides the reward. That benefit being the orc's jewels. Since they were a component of a powerful aphrodisiac, he could sell the body parts at a high price to nobles. He smiled evilly while walking off, making Sasha sweat drop and wonder what the male was thinking. At the village, the head thanked Gray for accepting the quest, and told a girl named Marina to greet Gray as well. The dark-haired male said that he would already be going out to exterminate the elder orc, but the village head insisted that Gray would rest before then since they had already prepared a room. As Gray walked off to the room, Marina thought about how the villagers had previously begged her to keep the adventurer company for one night, since she was the prettiest, just in order to make sure the quest was complete. She felt that she couldn't say no since the people of her village raised her after she lost her parents. So she walked over to the room they prepared and greeted him. Marina flinched at his presence as her body shook, while she tried to explain that she would be taking care of him for the night. However, Gray knew what was going on, and how the villagers were using her to make up for the low reward. It was true that there were a lot of rough adventurers, but not all of them made decisions with what was between their legs like Gansas. Though Gray heard that Gansas had no experience with women, the dark-haired male said that there would be no need, and that he would still complete the quest anyway, allowing the villagers to be able to hunt in the forest again and go back to normal lives. After calming down, the girl wished for him to sleep well, and walked off while thinking that he was kind. The other villagers were confused until she explained that he didn't need her, and he said he would still complete the quest. The next day, Marina made some breakfast for Gray and went back to the building to apologize for the previous night. He told her there was no need to apologize and ate the food, thanking her for it, as he prepared to go off to do the quest. The girl told him they were all counting on him, to which he waved and walked off. And this brings us to the present. The elder orc didn't know what Gray was talking about, but all it knew was that it needed to get away. However, Gray was faster, and sliced off one of its arms, telling it to say its final prayers while asking which one of its body parts it wanted him to take first. Before the monster could say anything, Gray had already killed it, and sliced away to gather the body parts he needed. He put all of his items in a magical bag that he had brought back when he was in a party, giving him the ability to not have to carry the monster materials by hand, but it still felt a little gross in general for him to do. The dark-haired male made his way back to the village, where everyone thanked him for his actions, to which Gray took out the head for proof, but that seemed to scare the villagers and confuse him as they told him to put it away. Marina ran up to the male and asked if he would stay again for the night, but he dismissed the offer since he had to hurry back, disappointing the girl as he walked off. Gray got on a carriage back to the city while his savings were increasing smoothly, making him believe that he could put his plan into action, the plan being building a dream home. Up until now, he had been living in an inn, but it was time for him to settle down, making him smile evilly about how the jewels he had gotten would help greatly. This scared the other people in the carriage, making him snap out of his thoughts. The following morning at the Bestoke Inn, Gray was trying to sew the doll, but he knew that sewing it would still have it tear again soon enough. He knew that it would likely be salvageable with alchemy, about to walk out when the innmaster grabbed his attention and asked about where he was going, and theorized that it was about a woman. The bald man was about to start talking about the stories of his past until Gray called for Lena, the innmaster's daughter, in order to stop her father from saying any more. She ran down the stairs and slammed her hands on the desk to yell at her father to not bother the customers with his stories, making the innmaster frantically try to explain himself. They started to argue as the innmaster told Gray it wasn't fair as they should be able to tell each other about their exploits as men. But Gray ignored the man and proceeded to walk off. As he left, he started to believe that the behavior of the old man was the reason why the inn wasn't so prosperous, despite the food being delicious and the rooms being clean. At the alchemist's workshop, Gray walked into the building to greet a man named Lux, who asked why Gray was carrying a doll around. Gray asked the male to fix the doll, but Lux was not going to do so unless he gave a certain body part of an elder orc, to which Gray pulled out the head. This frightened the alchemist, as he explained he meant the other body part, knowing exactly what Gray had. With that, Gray gave one of the jewels to Lux, feeling almost disappointed, if it weren't for the fact that Lux was the kind of guy who would give expensive cure potions for free if you're good to him. Despite it all, the doll was fixed, and Gray made his way back to the shack, and Nina was crying tears of joy and calling him dad again. Aria apologized for the behavior as Gray tried to calm down the child, and Stella walked up to tell the dark-haired male to make sure to pat Nina nicely, also calling Gray Dad. Gray remembered the doll and gave it back to her, making the girl cry more tears of joy as she hugged the doll, bringing up the mood. Everyone decided that it was a good time to make some food now, and Aria tried to tell Nina to go over with Theo for a while, but Gray said that the girl was fine where she was. The food was done, and Gray would notice Isuka trying to give his mushrooms away to Theo, who wasn't happy about the fact. He saw how ordinary Isuka was, and wondered how he was to become the protagonist of the world. He determined he was going to lend the boy his strength, but he would still like to let these kids continue peaceful lives if possible. Gray got all of their attention and asked if they wanted to live in the house he was planning to buy soon, causing them to be shocked by the kindness since he was asking all of them. Everyone seemed to be happy with the idea, and it wasn't as if he planned this either. He just couldn't get the courage to say goodbye to them after a month. Gray felt relieved that the suggestion didn't upset them, to which Aria said that they were already grateful. Everyone else agreed and turned to Stella, who responded with a thumbs up, meaning that everyone was now on board. Gray walked out of the shack and Nina walked after him, confused while asking where he was going. He hesitated about what to say before eventually kneeling down to the girl's height and patting her on the head, explaining that he was going to find them a new home. The dark-haired male told her to look forward to it, to which Nina agreed to do so, making Gray and the others glad that she didn't throw a tantrum and whatnot. Theo and Isuka say their goodbyes to Gray, and the male walks back to the city, while thinking about how he was going to need a very large house to be able to give everyone their own rooms. He made his way to the Adventurers Guild and was muttering to himself, until Gansis decided to try and annoy Gray once again, asking the dark-haired male if he bought any elder orc ears, since he didn't believe that Gray could actually take one down in the past 2 days. Gansis asked where to buy such stuff, but Gray just told the man that he could gather herbs and other such quests if he was too afraid to hunt goblins. However, Gansis only scoffed and insisted on the same question. Gray couldn't believe that he was being asked that, but he knew that there was a system in place to get rewards for slaying monsters even when there weren't specific quests. All a person would have to do was bring a certain item as proof, such as ears of an orc. And the reason Gansis was pestering Gray was that he wanted to get them as proof without having to fight for them. Gray sighed and reached into his magic bag, explaining that it wasn't just the ears he brought while proceeding to throw the head in Gansis's direction. The large male caught it and stared at it, not having processed it before finally dropping it to the ground with a surprised expression. Gray picked it back up and brought it closer to Gansis's face, grinning evilly while trying to scare him. Sasha got his attention and told him to come to the counter and report his quest completion immediately. He complied and put the head on the counter, but the girl in glasses said to not suddenly do that as it could be considered harassment. She didn't care herself, but she was worried about how the other receptionists would react. However, Gray didn't see a reason to worry, since he only ever came through her line even if it was crowded, since she was one of the few who was never afraid of his face. Sasha started to grumble to herself, complaining about his words, since she didn't know how to respond to them. She gave him the quest reward and he said that he had a question to ask, explaining the situation to her, which caused her to decide it was best to go outside with him. Sasha told another receptionist, Melinda, to take over for her, and the sleepy woman saw the monster head and started to freak out, as she had no idea what to do with it. They just ignored her, and Sasha brought the male outside, surprised that he was requesting real estate guidance. They stumbled upon a property that Gray recognized as the house that the Valkyrie party used, before moving to another building when the party got larger. The Valkyrie were an A+ rank party composed solely of women, and it was the closest to S rank, and Gray remembered being called to this building once on business involving the women. But at the thought of how the kids would react to the building, he immediately decided on the house. Sasha was surprised by how quickly he chose it, and he said it was because it was cheap. But Sasha explained that it was because the ladies of the Valkyrie were already going to cover half the cost, surprising Gray as Sasha walked off. After the purchase, Gray seemed to immediately sense 5 people all around him, knowing that they could only be after his life. The one behind him was cloaked and masked, asking if he was called Gray, and Gray seemed to recognize the spiderweb mark as the one that the thugs from the other day had. The dark-haired male asked if these people were from the Rapacious Spiders group, seemingly surprising the stranger, until Gray seemed to run behind the stranger and slice his hand off. He asked the same question to the cloaked man, but he didn't answer, so Gray sliced his head off and went off to kill the others. Eventually, Gray stumbled upon 2 people who were hiding in bushes near the shack where the kids were. They were chatting with each other, until Gray appeared behind them and frightened them, causing them to try to run. But Gray was faster and bound them with magic, asking them where the other members were. Gray took a break for a moment and visited the kids in the shack, proceeding to be greeted by Aria and Nina. They welcomed him home, and the small girl fell over while Gray was thinking about how he was going to put an end to the criminal group later, after putting the kids to bed. Nina got back up and asked for Gray to pick her up, shocking him with the requests, as he seemed to freeze in place while being overwhelmed with good feelings. He picked the girl up, which made Nina happy, and Izuka and Stella walked outside as well. Stella wanted to be picked up as well, and Gray complied. Seeing Lutz want to as well, he told the boy to wait his turn. Gray told everyone that he had bought their new house that day, and that they would be moving in 2 days when everything was taken care of, making everyone agree with happy smiles before everyone went off to bed. Gray pulled the covers over them and was about to walk out the door until Stella noticed that he was leaving, and asked if he was going to work, to which Gray said that she should just go back to sleep. The small vampiric child asked if he was going to come back, and Gray reassured her that he would, especially since they would be living together from then on. She told him to not get hurt or else everyone would worry, and when he was about to leave again, Stella said one last thing, and asked him to tell everyone at some point the reason why he became their father. He agreed to do so and walked off, feeling surprised that the child was able to see right through the male. Gray made his way back to the men he had chained up, who flinched in fear at his presence, and the dark-haired male said he was counting on them to guide him to their hideout, thinking about how he was going to have to work hard for the sake of his new life with the children. Eventually, the men led Gray to a building that had guards in front of it, and the men started to beg Gray to let them go while promising that they would change their lives. The dark-haired male said that the two had already thrown away their chance of living after trying to snoop around, proceeding to kill them, as letting them live would leave a potential threat to the kids' livelihoods. Gray walked up to the building and the guards asked him who he was, to which Gray said that he was an adventurer, but he dismissed his own response and asked them if they were rapacious spiders. The two guards looked at each other and seemingly gave a sign to each other, but Gray was able to slash their heads off before they could say anything. Going for the head like he had been doing was fast and fatal, but it also ensured that the corpses wouldn't rise as undead. The dark-haired male believed that he needed to hold off on magic because it would be a bother if anyone in the organization had a magic detection skill. Gray walked into the building, surprising the other members, as Gray proceeded to cut off the heads of each and every one of them. He went downstairs into what was believed to be a basement lair, taking a while for him to get to the room of their boss. A large man walked out from the shadows and claimed to be a former B-rank adventurer who would teach Gray a lesson. But regardless of if this was true or not, Gray killed him as well. An assassin tried to get Gray, but he easily dodged the cloaked man, making Gray wonder what was up with the teachings of the organization if they were this weak. It seemed one of the men that was in the hallway was one of the thugs that Gray had fought earlier who tried to run away, until Gray kicked him down and ordered him to tell Gray where their boss's room was. The bald man hit a lever which was supposed to be a trap, but Gray easily got out of it and killed the bald man with an annoyed expression. He finally stumbled upon the boss of the organization who asked Gray who he was to the kids, to which Gray paused for a moment, and ultimately decided to call himself their father. This confused the man who had the spiderweb on his face, saying that Gray was out of his mind, but Gray said that he was short on time and needed to end things. He told the long-haired male to apologize to everyone he had harmed in the afterlife, and the boss tried to say something that could have been important about the kids, but he was killed before he could finish the sentence. The next day, Gray woke up in the shack where Nina and Stella were sitting over him and patting him awake. They started to squeeze and poke at his face, to which Aria tried to tell them to let him sleep a little longer, but he decided to get up anyway. At the inn, they were discussing with each other how the rapacious spiders were apparently a large group with fighter types, yet were somehow just wiped out in one night. The innkeeper and his daughter heard that all the members, including the boss, were killed with their heads cut off, and this topic was something everyone was talking about when Lena went out to the shop. The old man said that the other groups would probably be too afraid to make a wrong move and become the guy's next mark, but Gray wanted to get back on topic about how he had been in their care all this time. Lena couldn't believe that Gray was leaving, since he had been there forever, and Gray remembered the first time she had seen his face and how she was so scared of him because of it. She couldn't remember it because she was so little, but her father chuckled at the thought. The innkeeper told Gray to come to them if he ever needed anything, causing the dark-haired male to grin at the kindness. It was the next day again, and Gray went back to the shack where everyone was getting ready. He looked at the children and was about to say that they were going to buy clothes, but he realized it would probably be best if they went to the bathhouse first. Everyone started to get excited at the idea of a bath, and the old woman at the public bathhouse greeted them, to which Gray asked her for private rooms for guys and girls. Fio was about to bid a temporary goodbye to Gray until Nina tried to ask if Gray was going to come with the girls, but Aria had to explain that he was a man and he couldn't come with them. They walked off to their respective baths, and Gray washed the hair of Lutz with an evil grin, feeling content that he was able to try parent and child activities such as washing hair. Gray told Izuka that he was going to be next, and the boy felt too embarrassed about it, but it eventually happened. Everyone ended their baths and made their way to the clothing shop, where the owner seemed a little frightened by the sight of Gray. Everyone picked out their clothes and seemed happy with their choices and walked out of the shop to their new house, all of them feeling speechless at the sight. Nina, Lutz, and Stella started to explore the house, and Fio and Isuka made sure to supervise them. Gray told Aria that all the rooms were first come, first serve, but she said that she would wait until the last one. The dark-haired male felt as though it was going to take a while until everyone would make willful requests, but he did decide that the little ones would sleep with either him or Aria for the time being, until they wanted rooms of their own. Now with all of these things secured, Gray started to wonder if they should go to school since the world had an academy where kids could attend from age 12. But it's questionable whether that would be helpful since it was a more perfect place for children of nobles to build relationships. If the kids of nobles did anything to these kids, he would definitely do something about it. He also remembered that the guy he killed was about to say something, and it wasn't as if he wasn't interested in the kids, he just felt he could get to know them as time passed. Plus, no matter what the circumstances were for the children, he was going to support them. He was about to go to sleep until Aria, Fio, and Isuka knocked on the door. They shyly admitted that they still wanted to sleep together since that was what they were used to. He put the sheets and futon on the floor and everyone went to sleep peacefully. After a while of living in the house, Isuka, Fio, and Aria eventually got used to sleeping in their own rooms. Isuka was seen in his bed, still sleeping while the birds chirped outside. However, the peace would soon end as Fio ran into the room and pulled the covers off of him, yelling at him to get up, as everyone had already started to eat breakfast. It had been close to a month since everyone started living in their new house, and Gray had started to learn things about the kids, such as how Isuka was not a morning person while Fio was sensible. Nina would eat a lot and Stella had a sweet tooth, while both of them seemed to be picky eaters and would try to get Gray to eat their leftovers that they didn't want to finish. Gray thanked Aria for cooking and he noticed the paper she was looking at, to which she explained that it was a copy she made. He was impressed that the girl could already read and write, when it was unusual for children of this world. Putting the recipe down before telling the others that he was heading out, he walked out of the door and saw Lutz staring at a cat, to which Gray told the boy to say hi to the cat for him as well. Lutz and Fio waved their goodbyes to Gray, who learned that Lutz didn't talk at all, but there was still a lot that everyone didn't know about each other. Gray would continue killing goblins as he always did, but his life was pretty different as well. Before, he would only go back to the inn to sleep or prepare for expeditions, but now he would only take day quests and only be thinking about quickly heading home to be with the kids. When he would go back to the guild to collect his rewards, Sasha would mention him how he seemed restless lately, to the point of even ignoring Ganzis. He was surprised that she noticed, and the dark-haired male asked if Ganzis had really been pestering him, to which Sasha said it had been every day, and the large man was even behind him at that moment. Gray just ignored the man and went home, walking through the markets and buying 7 donuts for the kids. As he walked through the city, he seemed to remember his past life when he would leave school and his friends to go home and would only come back to an empty house. His smile would drop and he would greet the 3 picture frames that stood on the table near the door. That was how his days went, since his family was already gone by that point, and it seemed like a meaningless ritual, but he just couldn't let go of it. The memories disappeared once he arrived back home and saw Nina and Lutz outside in the yard playing with each other, before they noticed Gray and ran up to him with smiles, greeting him happily. He picked them up and Aria noticed Gray as well, greeting him and excitedly taking the paper bag from him, wondering if he wanted to eat now or if he wanted to take a bath first. Gray said it was probably best for everyone to eat now, and explained that the bag was for everyone to share later, to which she sighed, and told the dark-haired male that he needed to only do it every once in a while as it was not healthy for the kids, especially since Stella would be skipping dinner just to get sweets. Gray agreed to do so, and realized Aria was more like a mother to the kids rather than an older sister. They all went inside and sat at the dinner table to eat, but it seemed as though Isuka and Fio were preparing themselves to tell Gray something. The two got the dark-haired male's attention and held serious expressions, as they told him that they wanted to become adventurers and wanted him to teach them swordsmanship and magic. This surprised both Gray and Aria seemed to be opposed to the idea, wondering where this idea had come from, as Fio explained that they too wanted to be helpful to the family. Gray realized the two were likely feeling bad for only being on the receiving end, but he was already fine for just having the joy of being a family. He did tell them that he wasn't opposed to their desires, since he was supporting everyone regardless, but he told them that they should set the idea aside for now. Once everyone was put to bed, Gray thought about how Ariamel's objection was probably out of concern for the two. This was expected, since adventuring was a job where anything could happen, but that was all the more reason to help Isuka and Fio gain the skills, so they could support themselves and the other kids if anything happened to him. Gray still wasn't planning on dying since he didn't want to let these children feel the pain of losing their family a second time. His thoughts were interrupted by Stella calling out to her father, and whether she meant Gray or her biological father, he turned to the girl, and heard the vampiric child talking about how something could cause transformation, leaving us with the question, what exactly could that mean? It was the next morning where Gray and the rest of the family were having their breakfast for the day. The dark-haired male clasped his hands together, as if in prayer, and thanked Aria for the meal she made, to which the girl responded with a smile. Nina copied Gray's actions and muttered the words as well, even if it wasn't a clear sentence. All the other kids immediately dug into the food at the table. Stella stared at the tall male with an intense gaze until his thoughts were interrupted by Aria, remembering that she had prepared a lunchbox for him that day since she thought that he'd been skipping lunch a lot, to which he accepted since he believed that there was no one who would reject such a kind action. The long-haired girl also wanted to talk about Isuka and Fio, since she was worried about their well-beings given their sudden interest in adventuring. But Gray was quick to reassure her that whether the two became adventurers or not, he wanted to support them in pursuing their dreams. He understood the concern, so he suggested that she talk with them herself, which she agreed to, telling the male to come home safely after his own adventuring. At the guild, Gray noticed that it was noisier than usual, so he walked up to a clerk who he was familiar with, Sasha, whom he asked if there was anything going on for the day. The woman explained that it was the day the ladies from the Valkyrie would return from their expedition, mentioning that they'd cleared a dungeon no one could before, and that the announcement flyer had been posted for days. Gray was surprised that he hadn't noticed something that important, making Sasha sigh before she told the male to line up for a different receptionist that day. Just before she left, the woman pointed at Gray and demanded that he would not turn in the heads of monsters anymore, as Melinda begged her, crying about it. As the male looked through all of the requests on the request board, he was thinking about how he hadn't gone to a dungeon in a few years, and all of the ones he would be interested in were all full of troublesome monsters. Among the monsters in this world, there was a small chance of one being born with a special ability. Most of the time, there was no way to know what ability they had until you fought them. For example, there could be a goblin with complete magic immunity, but aside from that, it was just a goblin, and would die from a simple physical hit or falling from a high place. Even if a monster was an excellent archer, if it used a club instead, novices could kill it. No matter how strong their ability was, if the monster didn't know about it, it wouldn't do them any good. But it would indeed become a problem if they were smart enough to utilize it. There could have been one among the goblins Gray killed yesterday, since he felt like there might have been one that was unusually fast. That might be something bestowed upon the monsters like a skill or gift that humans were born with. But the church would make a fuss if they heard about that, since he didn't think God would care whether someone was a human or a monster. After finishing his goblin killing, he took a break and ate the food Aria made him, praying to the food before realizing how delicious it was. The dark-haired male realized that Aria was good at housework and cooking, and was pretty, meaning that she would someday bring home a partner that he would have to practice not decapitating. Back at the guild, Gray made his way up to Melinda, who was worried at his presence, until she let out a sigh of relief when he brought exactly what was designated on the request. The male looked around and asked if the Valkyrie were back, to which Melinda said they were upstairs before teasing him, thinking that he was very interested in the members. Gray was quick to make his way back home, since he was sure they wouldn't leave town that early, knowing that there was something he wanted to talk with them about. He wanted to get a treat for the kids, but Gray knew he would get scolded, so he returned home and told Aria about how delicious the lunch was. She was ecstatic, and would make another one the next day, and the two entered the house as night came, chatting amongst each other until Gray heard knocking. Gray opened the door with confusion, before realizing that two members of the Valkyrie were there for some reason. These two women were Emilia and Kasha, both A+ rank adventurers of the Valkyrie, and it seemed as though they recognized who they were since they greeted him by name. Emilia explained that Melinda told them about how cold it was for him to leave early instead of sticking around to say hello, making Gray internally sigh about the clerk lady. Kasha jumped in and asked if he was going to invite them in, but that was when Aria peeked out and wondered if she needed to make tea for these new people. The two women were surprised by the presence of the girl, which confused Gray by their reaction, but he brought them in and they all sat in the living room. Isuka asked if they were friends, as Gray mentioned that they used to be in the same party, making the boy and Fio stare with awe. Aria gave them all some tea while Nina and Stella crawled up and clung onto his body, confusing him, as Aria explained that they were worried they would be taken away from him because of these women. Aria tried to coax the girls away, but they both refused. However, Emilia wanted to ask who these kids were. The dark-haired male was quick to respond that they were his kids, shocking the two women, before Emilia would hold an intense gaze and demand to know who the mother was. Nina got scared from the glare and intimidating aura that Emilia was giving off, causing the small girl to rub her face against Gray's body while insisting that Gray was her father. Kasha told the other woman to not be so aggressive as she was scaring the children, but Kasha was also being more reasonable about it and not jumping to conclusions, asking Aria how old she was. Since Aria was only 13 years old, Kasha knew that meant Gray would have already had children when he partied with them, along with the fact that the only one Gray was dating back then was Emilia. However, the girl felt flustered about that fact and stopped Kasha from finishing the sentence. With that, the conversation continued, and Kasha asked if Stella was a vampire, making the dark-haired girl worried about the question. Gray reassured Stella before sighing, as he was going to tell the two women everything from the beginning. Once he had done that, the two had calmed down, and knew this was to be expected of his character, since he was always quick to lend a hand even if he looked thuggish. Gray wanted to ask some questions himself, wondering how the Valkyrie knew that he would buy it, but they explained that the guild was informed that they would pay half for any party house he would buy. Although he was grateful, he was still confused until Amelia explained that buying a party house would likely mean he was forming a party, in which case meant that they would check out the members who supposedly changed his mind, since he used to be strongly against joining another party. When they checked in, they were surprised to see 6 children, and Gray agreed, but he was interrupted by the 2 girls seeming tired. Aria took them away despite their complaints, and they were put to bed, making Gray mention how dependable of a kid she was. Kasha chuckled at how he called her a kid when she gave off the vibe of a wife, but that would be enough conversation for the night. They were walked to the door and Gray offered to walk them home, but Amelia said there was no need, asking if he had forgotten who he was talking to, as no ruffians in the town would stand a chance against them. Kasha felt glad and reassured that Gray seemed the same as ever, mentioning that there had apparently been an entire criminal organization that was taken out about a month ago with all their heads cut off. Thanks to that, Amelia explained that the public order was good right now, which was even more reason not to worry. Gray agreed about that happening and Aria walked out of the door, wondering if the 2 women were leaving, to which Amelia apologized for staying so late. The girl smiled happily and said there was no need to apologize, as any friend of Gray was welcome anytime, making Amelia feel almost offended by the label given the history she had with Gray in the past. Aria wondered if she was mistaken, but Kasha was quick to dismiss the conversation and said they would be heading home now. Gray wondered what all that was about, and Aria assumed that it was because the 2 women wanted to come and see how Gray was doing, because they cared about him. It was already the next morning, and Gray was saying his temporary farewells to Stella and Nina, who were telling him to hurry back, since they were obviously going to miss him even if it was for a short while. Aria quickly walked up and reminded him about how he forgot the packed lunch she made for him that day, telling him to take care and have a nice day as well. He turned his head to see Isekai'd and Fio practicing sword fighting with some large and sturdy sticks they found, telling them to not overdo the training. Fio told him to have a nice day as well, while Isekai'd said that he should teach them some magic next time. However, they were quickly reprimanded, and told to learn to read first before anything else. The male knew that Aria could teach them to read as well, so that would be a good opportunity for the 3 of them to talk. Having a family to see him off like that was a luxury. It was more valuable than any extravagant meal or trove of jewels. Gray felt like he was capable of doing anything to protect this lifestyle, feeling the energy flow through his body that he called father power, which caused him to smile in an evil manner even if there was no ill intention. At the Adventurers Guild, Amelia and Kasha were there to greet him and apologize once again for the previous night. Gray told them it was fine, and thanked them for worrying about him, but it seemed as though they weren't the only members there. One of the Valkyrie members walked up to Gray, greeting him while replacing the end of her sentence with the letter V standing for victory, to which Gray recognized her to be Halsaria. The woman turned to Amelia and said it was time for them to go, since that was what everyone seemed to be saying, making Gray surprised that they already had another job when they just got back. Amelia said that there was no other quest for them to do and that they were just going to see Lord Bastoke that day, since he apparently wanted to hear all about the garden dungeon, making Gray chuckle and mention his interest in the matter of what happened. The leader of the Valkyrie decided he could know as well and started to blush, stuttering heavily when she tried to ask the male out to lunch, but Halsaria pulled the woman away before she could finish. Melinda wondered if Gray was on good terms with the Valkyrie, to which the male mentioned that they had known each other for a long time. With that, he left to go on his next quest, while thinking about how Melinda would have asked for way more details if he said that they used to party together. The reason the party was dissolved was no big deal, but he still didn't want to bring the past up. Gray's former party was called the One Blade and was made up of 6 people: Amelia the swordswoman, Kasha the healer, Gray the magic knight, the leader, and 2 others. At the time, they were active in a different country and their rank was advancing smoothly, but bothersome obligations increased at the same time. That was probably why the Lord wanted to see Valkyrie, likely to form a connection with future S-rank adventurers. Thinking about it normally, it would benefit both sides, but he didn't know how Amelia and the others felt about it. Gray was curious about the dungeon and would need to talk with them about it while having them over again, as Isekai'd and Fio would be thrilled to hear, even if Aria would feel mixed. But if the reason those 2 said they wanted to be adventurers was because of Gray, he was confident that he would cry. After finishing up his lunch, the male stood up, and Gray squished at his stomach, surprised when he realized he was starting to gain some weight. This wasn't a bad thing for him, but he felt as though he was living the good life by taking easy quests and eating delicious food every day, which made him wonder what was for dinner. Back at the guild, Amelia was also there, and knew that he had taken an easy job from how early he was, making her think that it was for the kids. That was part of the reason, and Gray wondered if the Lord didn't invite her to dinner, to which she said that he did, but that she turned down dinner with a noble. Emilia explained that a garden wasn't even the main topic, as she explained that it seemed as though a hero was chosen by an oracle in another country, and that the Lord wanted to deploy the Valkyrie as the hero's party members, surprising Gray by hearing of a hero being chosen. Emilia knew what the Lord was trying to do by recommending an all-woman group, feeling as though they were just being sent as potential brides. Kasha told her to keep her voice down and said that they should go, bringing Emilia along, while Gray hoped that nothing ill would come from Emilia turning down a request from the country. He was still confused, though, since he thought that Isko was the hero, making him wish that he had some knowledge of the game. When he returned home, he felt glad that it seemed as though Iska wasn't the hero, but his thoughts were interrupted by Aria saying the three had something to show him. Lutz, Stella, and Nina showed their drawings, which made Gray almost collapse to the ground, feeling shaken up by the situation. The kids wondered if he wasn't happy, but he quickly reassured them, hugging them and saying he was more than happy. Gray thanked them, and said he would buy frames with every kind of resistance magic on them, thinking about how he vowed to become a wonderful father to them. It was the next day once more, and it seemed normal as always, but Aria seemed to have her mind plagued with worry, thinking about Isuka and Fio. She put a hand to the window and watched as Gray looked like he was saying something to the two kids, making them pout sadly before he would venture off to his adventurer duties. Deciding to dismiss the thought for a moment, the long-haired girl walked over to Stella and Nina, where the vampiric girl asked what they were going to do that day, and Nina felt excited, as she said that she wanted to play that day. Aria chuckled and said that they would spend the day stomping on the laundry, which was the low-tech equivalent to a washing machine cycle. The two seemed happy with the answer before running off to let Nina put away her doll to have nap time. Isuka and Fio walked into the house with Lutz by their side, while the dark-haired boy insisted they should go do something as well. With that, Aria told them that they could help clean the bath. They didn't refuse the task, but it seemed as though Isuka and Fio wanted to talk about the sword practice they'd been doing, wanting to discuss something with Aria after they'd finished cleaning, which the long-haired girl agreed to. Nina and Stella happily helped Aria wash the laundry by stomping into the soapy water in a marching motion, while Isuka and Fio were in the near distance washing the place. It seemed as though the dark-haired boy slipped on something and fell to the ground, hitting his head, making Aria worried about his state. Nina and Stella wondered if the boy was alright, and Fio asked him how and why he even fell at all, telling him that she was going to get first aid for him. The other kids continued their stomping while Aria told the three that they should hold on tight to each other to not end up like Isuka, making the boy feel embarrassed for his action. After a while, it seemed as though they were all done for the day with the laundry, making Aria feel proud of everyone for their help and excited to get praise from Gray. The older girl decided it was time to feed everyone, which everyone enjoyed except for Stella, who was still hesitant about eating, since she almost always wanted something sweet. After the food was finished, the family started to clean up the place while Fio was ready to go out and do some shopping for the next time they would eat. Aria looked out the window and saw Lutz taking out some leftovers and feeding it to the cat outside named Nora. Nina was in there with him and they both seemed content doing this action, watching the cat eat happily, making Aria sigh while shaking her head with a smile. Stella walked up to her and told her that she needed to go to the bathroom, making the girl decide that everyone should take their turns to go to the bathroom since it was time for napping. All the younger kids went to take their nap, making Aria smile, and Isuka and Fio walked into the room. The two mentioned how they really wanted to become adventurers, but Aria wanted them to do something less dangerous like getting jobs in town. Isuka and Fio both refused and wanted to help people the way Gray did, hoping that Aria wouldn't worry after all the studying they would do, as they asked her to teach them how to read and write. She still couldn't help but be worried, thinking about how the two could think about their futures because Gray reached out with kindness to them. The girl agreed to teach them with a reluctant smile, before seeing Lutz having woken up, making Fio wonder if he was interested in learning as well. Nina also woke up and wondered what Lutz was doing, while Stella seemed to be half asleep still, having weird dreams with Gray in them. Aria got an idea, and told everyone to write letters to Gray, causing them to all become excited and agree, which made the older girl content, as she watched the others trying their best to learn how to write. The next day, Gray would find himself waking up in bed with the three young children. He would stare at the ceiling in silence as Stella and Nina laid at his side, and Lutz would be above the blanket and almost about to fall off the bed with any other movement. Gray carefully started to get up from the bed in order to not wake anyone up, but he knew that today was the day to do one single thing. With that in mind, he glanced over at the wall, on which were the multiple drawings that the three children had made, making him think about how he needed to go buy some picture frames for the drawings. The dark-haired male walked out of the room, and Aria let out a sound of surprise while wondering if she woke him, explaining that she was just getting ready to make breakfast. Gray explained that he was always leaving everything to the girl, and wanted to help out every once in a while, to which the long-haired girl smiled and decided to allow this. They started to set up the dishes and cook the food, putting it on the table once it was done. Gray started to wonder if he made too much, but he decided to dismiss this as he saw Theo barge through the doors while apologizing for oversleeping. Aria greeted the girl, who was surprised to see Gray there, to which the male told her to go wake everyone up, as the girl felt embarrassed for having bedhead. She timidly walked off and everyone got together to make their way to the dining room, but it seemed as though the 3 younger children were all still sleepy. The tall male got out some towels and had a determined expression, as he decided that he would get the 3 washed up before breakfast, which Aria had no complaints about. He felt as though he was going toward a battlefield as he brought the children to the bath. They were either throwing tantrums, drinking the water, or drowning in the bucket. After all that trouble, he brought them back, and Aria started to laugh at the sight. Gray seemed to remember something and told the girl that she didn't need to make lunch, as he wasn't taking a quest that day, and he wanted to go out with everyone to eat, causing the younger children to get excited. Stella wondered if she could go too, which made Gray pat her head and affirm so, since it was a family outing. He could understand why Stella was worried, as she must think that everyone looked at them strangely because of her vampiric descent. But Gray would deal with those types of people, no problem. The dark-haired girl seemed content with the situation, but Gray seemed to have been reminded about something he talked about with Halsaria. A city guardsman walked up to them and mentioned that they received a report that someone who looked like they would sell an elf was talking to an elf, making Gray confused by the description. But Gray wondered if this man would bring him trouble again, since it was more Gray himself that made people look at them strangely rather than Stella. The guardsman didn't seem happy to see Gray again, and harassed him about the children he was with, which he felt exhausted about, since he would always have prejudice against his face. The guard asked whose children these were, and said that their parents must be worried, but Gray explained he was their parent, which confused the guard, since the children looked nothing alike. However, Gray tried to say that there were blood-related families who also didn't look alike. Along with that, the guard tried to ask about Stella, which made Gray get defensive as the guard tried to remind him that their job was to keep the peace. He was interrupted by Aria getting everyone's attention while insisting that Gray was telling the truth, and that they were his children and it was none of the guard's concern. The younger children clung onto Gray's leg, and Isuka and Fio stood in front of Gray, but the dark-haired male knew that the scene looked like he was bullying the guards anyway. Aria told Gray that they should go now, as the guards didn't even want to do anything with them when they were tattered. The girl got flustered by how worked up she was getting, but Gray thanked everyone for their actions while thinking that helping these kids was the best decision he has ever made. Everyone made their way to the previous inn that Gray used to stay at, where Lena and her father were surprised to see Gray and these children, to which the dark-haired male asked if they were way too surprised. The two said that it would be more strange to not be surprised, seeing as Gray was walking with 6 children, and 3 of them were clinging to his body, but Gray said there was nothing strange about it. The old man scratched at his head, while thinking that the house was bought due to the kids, which Gray said was only part of the reason, and the rest was just perfect timing. But the bald man grinned and said that Gray had done something that didn't suit his face. Lena went to cook food for everyone, which Ariamel asked for the recipes of, and Gray asked why the food was better than normal, to which the father explained that eating with one's family made food taste better. Gray thought about how this was the reason why he was putting on weight, and Lena's father felt his ego grow, while trying to suggest that Gray should come to him if he ever needed advice, which Gray wasn't feeling would be the greatest idea. A few days later after this family outing, Ariamel told Gray to have a nice day like always, along with the children to wish that as well. But the long-haired girl seemed to be in higher spirits than normal, so he asked if something good happened. That was when she mentioned that she was going to go shopping with Lena that day, to which she told Nina that they could go play again another time, and Gray felt glad that Ariamel and Lena were good friends already. That very evening, the dark-haired male started to wonder what was going to be for dinner that night, and that was when he ran into Lena's father. He mentioned that the 2 girls were getting along well, and were shopping just over in the distance, but that was when the 2 men realized that Lena and Ariamel were being talked to by 2 boys, who were likely trying to hit on them. Gray and Lena's father had scary expressions appear on their faces, as they loomed over behind the 2 girls while saying that they would have a long chat with these men as well, causing the 2 boys to feel intimidated. The 2 girls were surprised by their actions as they were told to go ahead home and start preparing dinner without them, as Gray and Alina's father dragged the 2 boys away, reprimanding them for their behavior in a nearby building. They were told not to do these things again, and the 2 boys seemed to be extremely scared as they begged for their organs and families to be okay, which confused the 2 of them by the response. The 2 ran out of the building while still apologizing, and it seemed as though Ariamel was waiting for Gray out there, which confused him. She apologized for being a bother for him, but he said there was no need. However, she still felt guilty about it, and tried to say something, until Gray interrupted her and told her that seeing her out having fun with Alina made him glad to introduce the 2. He seemed to be flustered about being so sentimental, and rubbed the back of his neck, while explaining that seeing the two of them having fun made him happier than anything else, and her trying to hold back bothered him more, so he wanted to spoil everyone a bit more like Lena. Nina thought that her name was called, which caused her to run up to Gray, making him pick her up, while mentioning that Nina loved being spoiled. Gray told the little girl that he would spoil her a lot, which made her hug him with excitement, and that was when Stella and Lutz wanted a hug as well. The dark-haired male walked over to Isuka and Fio, who were hesitant about getting a hug, but he did it without asking. Aria walked up as well and wondered if a hug for her would be okay, but he only responded with an inviting hand, giving everyone a big hug. During another day in town, Gray was doing his normal routine, and stumbled upon Lena, who waved at him, telling him that there was a rumor going around that if anyone bothered her or Aria, a pair of nefarious guys would kidnap them. So that seemed to stop the problem of boys hitting on them, which made the girl thank him. He didn't know how to respond since he thought that he and Lena's father were upright citizens and didn't kidnap people. When he returned home, Isuka was practicing sword fighting with Gray, and was having trouble since he would close his eyes when swinging. Gray remembered something that Aria told him about how she asked for him to teach Isuka and Fio swordplay, as they had been working hard with the housework and reading, even if she still didn't entirely approve of this lifestyle. Magic would have to wait until they've mastered reading, as there was no point otherwise, and Gray had nothing to teach to someone who wasn't serious about learning. There were people who wanted to learn but never got the opportunity, so one had to do whatever it took. Gray told Isuka to take a break, while Fio would be next, and the two would cycle until Gray believed that day's worth of training was done. At the Church of the Holy Kingdom, Storia, there was a person clad in armor who was told that the preparation for their departure should be complete. They were told to wait there while the carriage was being readied, but the man in glasses seemed to not be happy with this boy, as he believed it to be troublesome to take care of a gloomy child. The other knight mentioned how this boy had unbelievable strength, and had surpassed the average person in just 3 months, but they needed him to reach Holy Knight level as there was word that the hero had been chosen. The older male interrupted the knight and said that the saintess was from their country, so the knight should watch their tongue. This man in glasses felt exhausted that this era's important people were both orphans, but he believed that helped to lessen the future trouble when bringing them there. They got a move on so they could welcome their saintess, Aria, but the knight didn't think this was going to be a welcoming since it was more of an abduction. With that, the knight and man in glasses got into their carriage and rode away. During some time on a different day, it seemed as though Gray was starting to do more research about the history of this world, since he could never get such information during his previous life. He read up on the books about the hero and saintess, humming in thought, while he looked through the multiple pages. Isuka wondered if Gray said something, but the dark-haired male dismissed the question, before asking the boy and Fio what they thought about the hero and saintess from the stories. Isuka didn't have any strong opinions or thoughts about them, and Fio hummed in thought, pressing the pen to her chin while remembering that they were supposed to be the ones who would supposedly save the world. But the scope was so big it sounded like a story from a fairy tale. Gray went into his own thoughts, thinking about how he believed that the two, as the protagonist and heroine, would have special bloodlines, but from their reactions, it seemed unlikely, and that they didn't even have interest in the topic. So Gray was going to ask the Nap Squad later, which included Stella, Lutz, Nina, and Aria. Fio wondered if something happened to Gray since he was deep in thought, but Isuka didn't know exactly what happened. The previous day, when Gray was on his way to the guild to report quest completion as always during his daily routine, he stumbled upon Emilia, who told the male that he should come to their party house for a bit. The woman started to pull him by the arm, which confused him even more, but Emilia apologized and said that he should just come quietly for now, making it seem as though this was an important situation. When they found their way to the large mansion-like building that the Valkyries stayed in, Kasha apologized for the sudden invitation, while she asked Gray to listen to what they had to say. He wondered if this was something that they couldn't talk about at the guild, and Kasha explained that there were too many people there, telling the male to take a seat while she would make tea. Gray said it was fine and to just get to the point, so they all sat down, and Halsaria explained that the hero was on the way from the neighboring Holy Kingdom, and that they were traveling through the woods for some reason. The dark-haired male heard that elves could perceive fairies, so he asked about how they knew that this male was the hero, to which Halsaria said that the fairy folk knew this as soon as he entered their territory. The hero wasn't coming alone, but there weren't that many people coming anyway. However, Gray was still confused as to why he was being told this, to which Kasha reminded how they turned down the invitation, so this seemed very suspicious after their declination. The Valkyrie wanted to let Gray know so he could help in case something happened, but it was mostly on Emilia's initiative. Gray found it suspicious as well, since they were avoiding roads, which meant this had something to do with Isuka and the others, making him think about how he had to hold off from quests. The male told the women that if the worst case happened, they should take care of his kids, to which they affirmed to do so, but they wondered if a hero would die if they lost their head by Gray's hand. That was all that happened that previous day, so Gray was starting to focus more on the kids. and making sure that they were safe in the meantime, until the hero and the other people he was with would arrive. When Gray got out of his memories, he realized that Aria was awfully late, to which Theo chuckled and pinned the blame on the younger children having trouble getting to sleep. The dark-haired male got up and checked on them, seeing Aria sleeping next to the others, so he put a blanket over them and left the room. Izuka asked about it and learned that she fell asleep with the others, so they decided to keep the volume a bit quieter. Gray was impressed at how the two had been working so hard lately, so he wondered if the hero's objective was related to the kids, the girls, or something else. No matter what, he was going to protect the kids. A knock interrupted his thoughts, and Theo was about to get the door until Gray told her to keep studying, as he would check on it. When he got to the door, he put a hand to his blade just in case, only to eventually hear the voice of Emilia. He opened the door with confusion, especially since she had come alone, and the woman was invited in, but she explained that Kasha had told her to come back as soon as she told him the information she had. Emilia explained that Halsaria heard that the hero had exited the forest already, so they should arrive in less than a day. She also had something for the male, giving him a magic device that was meant for communicating, and could be used if anything happened even if they couldn't directly exchange words. These weren't a thing back when he was in a party with the others, but he didn't refuse the offer, and saw the woman off while thinking about getting such items for Izuka and the others later. The two asked about who was at the door and started to whisper amongst themselves about Emilia, while the male would make them something to drink. But as he set the drinks down, Theo asked if Emilia was his girlfriend, which made him spit out the drink. Gray asked her what made them think that, to which the girl explained that Emilia had different eyes when looking at him compared to anyone else. The dark-haired male mentioned that they dated back in the day, but it had been a long time since then. However, Theo wanted to learn more. Gray said they just drifted apart, and Theo tried to ask more, but that was all she was going to get, and Gray didn't know why such information was so interesting. Aria barged through the door and felt apologetic, her hair a mess while she said that she would make lunch. Izuka told the girl that they all already ate together, confusing her, until she realized that she was just dreaming. The long-haired girl felt flustered and embarrassed, saying she would go to wash her face. Gray mentioned how Aria had an impressive bedhead, but Theo said not to mention that, as Aria was a young lady, confusing him as he thought it would be worse for the girl to not know in the first place. Evening arrived at the house of Gray's family, and it seemed as though Aria was starting to make dinner as usual, and Gray wanted to help prepare the food, but it seemed as though the girl became hesitant, and reassured the dark-haired male that she could handle it all by herself that day. Although he was hesitant when he heard her answer, the male still wanted to respect the response and couldn't help but wonder if Aria was entering a rebellious phase. As the dark-haired male walked outside the house to check up on the others, Nina greeted him happily and waved with a smile. Theo and Lutz outside as well, seeming as though they were all making flower crowns. Gray waved back before he heard the voice of Lena's dad mentioning Gray's behavior while taking care of these children, to which Gray asked if Lena finally kicked the bald man to the curb, likely as a joke, but the older male grumbled in response before explaining he had brought leftover soup. It was the first time Lena's father had seen the building that Gray and his children had been living in, complimenting the house with a grin until the male wanted to mention as well that there were guys asking around at the inn and the guild's bar about Aria. He warned Gray to be careful as they were dressed like mercenaries or adventurers, but were too well-mannered to actually be authentic, to which Gray understood and thanked Lena's father in response for the information. The older male said there was no need, as Aria was Lena's friend, and was family to Gray, so it was expected for a friend to help out. After saying this, Lena's father seemed to walk away, not before receiving a flower crown from Nina and the others though. When Gray walked back into the house, Aria noticed the pot of soup and was surprised by it, having a grin formed on her face when Nina explained that the pot was from Lena's father who came with it, to which Gray explained that Lena's father said it was due to leftovers. Gray, as well as the 3 others who walked in with him, all had flower crowns on their heads, as Aria told the others they should bring Lena and her father something in response, as a thanks for this act of kindness. But it was time for dinner, so everyone went to wash their hands. Once everyone was washed up and already finished dinner, they were resting in the living room until a knock was heard at the door. Aria was about to get up to open it until Gray told her that he was going to get it, warning her to stay out of sight. She was a bit confused, especially as he continued and said that she shouldn't wait up for him if he went out somewhere. When she agreed, Gray knocked back on the door and asked who it was, since it was late. Someone spoke and apologized, explaining they were members of the mercenary group called Night Mist Hawks. They claimed to have been hired by a certain noble to find a missing girl by the name of Aria, to which Gray believed was a bold-faced lie, since a noble could just use private guards or high-level adventurers bound by law to find missing people instead of mercenaries. Adventurers had identification cards issued by the guild, and the cards also came with constraints, which would mean that high-rank adventurers were required to prioritize jobs for nobles. However, mercenaries had no such constraints, and got jobs based on personal trust, meaning these guys likely have strong ties to the noble in question. It was possible that they knew Gray's status as an adventurer, but all he knew was that they couldn't be trusted. With that, Gray opened the door and two men in armor could be seen, about to ask about Aria until Gray asked for the name of the noble who hired them. They claimed they couldn't reveal such information, making Gray decide to decline to give information, which he would have done if they said they worked for royalty. Gray's answer seemed to make them frown, making the dark-haired male glare at them, which caused the two to really wonder if there wasn't anything to tell. He still insisted there wasn't, and asked if they were really mercenaries, making them wonder what he implied. The dark-haired male told them it was past his children's bedtimes, as he didn't want to stain their home with blood. But the men looked with suspicion into the house and decided to take their leave. Gray knew there was likely someone at the back door, but all doors and windows had security measures and were durable, so no one could get in easily. Besides, there was no doubt in Gray's mind that these people were waiting for him to go to bed to launch a sneak attack, the likely tactic being that they would leave Aria alive and silence anyone else. As Gray started to grin about how he would take the initiative instead of waiting to be attacked, it seemed Amelia was running to him with a worried face and dragging along a body. Meanwhile, the two who had just left believed that Gray was hiding Aria, which wasn't false, but they had the wrong idea about it as they thought that Gray was a thug because of his looks. The two didn't think that the children that Gray had were his own, believing that they were being gathered for nefarious reasons, and they were going to report to the bishop after joining up with their third person. But that was when a voice asked if that was the right name. They were shocked and pulled out their blades, turning around to see Gray breathing heavily, having a large grin on his face as he dragged the body of their comrade along, telling them not to leave their trash lying around. The dark-haired mercenary asked what Gray had done to their companion, to which Gray told the male to lower his volume, before explaining that his friend apprehended him for being sneaky behind his house. Gray agreed that it seemed as though their comrade was in the wrong, explaining that he was still alive and would be returned as long as answers were given. With that, the dark-haired male asked why they were looking for Aria, and their reasoning for why the bishop wanted her, but it seemed as though they were planning to do something to him instead of answering. Due to that, Gray didn't like their response, and had no tolerance, his next action being to immediately slash off the arm and head of the dark-haired mercenary. The other one stared with confusion and shock at the fact that Gray was so fast, watching as Gray turned around and immediately charged forward to decapitate the other as well. A familiar face came into the area after Gray had finished off killing all of the mercenaries, the sharp-eared woman asking if he was done, while the last mercenary's head fell to the ground with a thud. Gray asked if Halsaria had seen the whole thing, causing her to give a peace sign, as she affirmed she had, which made Gray wonder why she was even asking. Halsaria glanced over at the corpses and mentioned how merciless Gray seemed to be, as usual, but he didn't seem to find a reason for mercy when his children were being threatened, causing the woman to tease him and call him the doting parent type. With that, Halsaria told the male to hurry up and get a wife, suggesting her group's leader as a joke, since she knew that Amelia would go completely red-faced from embarrassment. Pushing that aside, Gray asked where the hero was, and Halsaria pointed in a vague direction, affirming that it seemed to be correct since the spirits said so. She said that there were 5 people including the hero, and that one was in a fancy robe, one in white armor, and 2 with the same armor as the corpses on the ground. Gray thought about how Halsaria was a top-notch scout, being better than his own attempts, which almost made him disappointed. The sharp-eared woman said that she was going to back him up when they went to fight, since she would only get yelled at if she went back to Amelia, who was watching the house, something that Gray told her and Kasha to do in order to protect the children, even if Amelia looked sad. It seemed as though there was something off between her and Aria the last time they met, so he hoped they would get along this time. Meanwhile, near Bestoke, the bishop was complaining about the 3 not coming back. The report said that the girl was taken in by an adventurer, which seemed easy enough to make a trade, but the bishop said there were alternative plans in the case that Aria is still being kept, just wanting to see if the girl was really there. The older man started to get irritated since he wanted to get this done, and he would possibly even become a vicar if he did this task, not caring what they had to do or who they had to kill. As the male muttered to himself, the hero that people had been hearing about recently was sitting in the nearby distance, and looking down with a sadness in his eyes and not much other emotion. He started to think about how Aria was going to become separated from the people she cared about, making someone else there complain about how gloomy the hero looked. This man was someone with long hair and white armor, his name being Londi. He had a bored and irritated expression, mentioning that he was getting angry sitting there not having a woman to bed. The bishop knew that there was no way Londi would lose to an A-rank adventurer, but he was worried about the male doing anything to the girl while trying to get the girl, so the bishop reminded him that he was his bodyguard. Their conversation was interrupted by Gray walking into the area and saying the atmosphere was pretty bad, confusing the bishop, as he asked about the identity of Gray. The dark-haired male stared with a glare, while believing that these were the stalkers who had been harassing his family that night and trying to do something bad to his daughter, making the group confused by the question. The two knights that were with the bishop turned around with worried looks on their faces due to the fact that someone had figured out their plan, to which the old man told them to silence, as it was the fault of the three knights for failing to carry out a simple errand. They went silent as told, and the bishop sighed, asking Gray what his objective was, only to learn that it was supposedly to settle the matter. With that reason, the old man asked how much the dark-haired male wanted, making Gray confused, as the bishop believed that Gray was after money and would hand over Aria for a certain price. This seemed to make Gray extremely angry, seemingly surprised to hear that Aria had such a high label put on her. It was confirmed so by the bishop, saying that was what was chosen by the oracle. After that simple piece of information was given, the bishop seemed to put a reassuring smile on his face, as he tried to explain to Gray that it wasn't necessary for Aria to be a maiden, causing Gray to have a shadow fall over his face as he was both in confusion and disbelief at the question. The bishop explained further, and said that it didn't matter if Gray already had intimate relations with the girl, seemingly making light of such an action as if it were normal. But the bishop didn't have time to finish his sentence, as Gray was already preparing his blade to kill the bishop. Unfortunately, just as expected, Londi had already charged forward and stood in between the bishop and Gray, clashing weapons with the dark-haired male as Londi let out a sigh of relief about how close that was. With an overconfident grin, the long-haired knight mentioned how killing the bishop would have caused a lot of trouble, and that Londi would be facing Gray instead. Gray likely didn't care, and only stared down at the confident male with a glare, while the bishop was left there, still silent in shock about what happened. He brought his hands up to his neck where Gray was likely going to slash him, before getting frantic and offended that someone such as an adventurer like Gray would raise a sword against a bishop, telling the hero boy Aless to join the fight and make sure to kill Gray. Aless flinched at the order and reluctantly listened, pulling out his blade as he looked forward at the already ongoing battle. Gray clashed blades with the long-haired knight, who told Gray to keep his eyes on him, pushing Gray away a bit of distance, as the dark-haired male skidded against the grass. He glanced over at Aless, who still looked to just be a kid, believing that this boy did not fit the image of a hero at all. While he didn't know how strong Aless was, he still believed that the guy in white armor was likely more skilled. Even so, he was going to have to hold out and buy time until Halsaria would be back, deciding his first move would be to put the hero out of commission. As Gray pulled up his blade again, his piercing eyes directed toward Aless. The boy was about to join the fight until Londi suddenly punched the boy, grinning, as he told Aless not to get involved, as he claimed to be able to take Gray by himself. After Londi had punched the chosen hero of the world, the bishop was shocked by the White Knight's action, and asked the long-haired male what he was doing, to which Londi felt frustrated by it all and told the bishop to shut up. Londi felt even more irritated than he already was, believing that a holy knight couldn't be seen relying on the hero to beat a mere adventurer. The male glanced over at the bishop and wanted to ask to get physical with Aria before they would take her back if he killed Gray. However, that gave Gray the opportunity to try and get a closer swing in, but it was still not one to hit the long-haired knight. Londi clicked his tongue while hearing Gray tell the knight in white armor that he was already doing and saying enough, explaining that he was going to send the male to meet his god. As Gray was preparing to slash at the white-armored knight, leaping into the air to bring more force into the swing of his blade, Londi got back up and tried to block the attack, which caused his feet to start cracking through the ground from the force of the blow. Halsaria could hear the noises and explosions of the battle coming from the distance, causing her to stare while mumbling about how Gray was doing a bit too much. She started to leap from tree to tree as the battle continued. Londi started to tremble and quiver from the strength that Gray seemed to have. He cursed under his breath, sweat dripping down his face as a vein popped in anger and frustration. Londi grit his teeth as he tried to hold up the attack, wondering if the dark-haired male really was just an adventurer. The bishop started to scream again, frantic as he wondered what Londi was doing after all of his big talk. He told Londi to hurry up and kill Gray. However, as the long-haired knight continued clashing blades with Gray, he told the bishop to shut up and turned around to tell the older male he would kill him first if he didn't stay quiet. This surprised the bishop greatly, watching Londi turn back with anger and confusion, as he was wondering where Gray seemed to be aiming out. As the dark-haired male kept aiming his blade swings at a low height, Gray was quick to answer, and explained that those who didn't listen to consent regarding physical intimacy should have his lower area removed. Londi was shocked at the casual yet violent remark, calling Gray crazy for wanting to do such a thing. Gray was pushed back once again, giving the long-haired white knight time to pant heavily and catch his breath, surprising Gray since he had strengthening magic on him. Either way, Londi thought that he would finally get an opportunity to get a hit in on Gray, about to draw his sword again as he cursed under his breath from the fact he was going to have to use his special move against the dark-haired male. In the last moment before activating the move, he told Gray he was going to do what he wanted with Aria in front of Gray's corpse, saying the words in order to try and activate his special move. However, it seemed as though something interrupted his spiel, aimed directly at the lower part of his body that he was trying to protect from Gray's attacks this whole time. An arrow was shot straight at his lower region, causing him to stare at the arrow with confusion. Due to that, he wasn't able to process the fact that Gray had already charged forward, finally decapitating him, as Londi's severed head landed on the grass and rolled toward the now scared bishop and 2 knights. The knights didn't really seem motivated or confident to fight, and Aless was still unconscious, so the bishop was terrified and wondered how he was going to get out of the situation. Halsaria leapt from where she was hiding and approached Gray, letting him know that her part of the plan was all done. The dark-haired male thanked the archer and praised her for the work, but he was also lost in thought when it came to the battle he was just in. Fighting against Londi had a moment of surprise that bewildered Gray even after winning. Not that the knight had any chance, but just that Gray was shocked that Londi would come at Gray with a move that had so many openings. Putting that aside, the two stepped toward the trembling form of the bishop, to which Gray hung his blade over his shoulders, while sarcastically asking if the older male finished praying to his god. It seemed as though the bishop was speechless, staring with a frozen and panicked expression filled with distress. Gray loomed over the bishop, smiling widely, and telling the male that he should be more happy since he would meet his god soon. The bishop still tried to find a way to escape the idea of death, frantically explaining to Gray that killing him would supposedly cause an outrage from the church, and that he could pay the adventurer in exchange for his own life, but Gray promptly interrupted with a declination. The bishop proceeded to attempt to suggest women as a trade, clearly getting desperate, as he was making such a ridiculous offer in front of a woman. Gray declined that as well, but the older male tried to persuade Gray with a potential position as a holy knight, only to hear Gray mention settling the situation with reparation fees. This seemed to spark some hint of hope within the bishop, who tried to appease with agreement that money is needed to live. He asked Gray how much money he wanted, causing the dark-haired male to laugh loudly, turning toward the other soldiers and implying that he already received payment for killing 4 of their group. The bishop didn't understand the vague words, while the soldiers either froze up in shock and disbelief or tossed aside their weapon to beg for mercy. Unfortunately for the soldiers, Gray did not take any pity nor hesitance. Grinning wider and asking the soldiers what they were afraid of, he mentioned that the church should have taught them that following the word of God and doing good deeds would lead to a happy afterlife, telling them they had nothing to worry about if they didn't have a guilty conscience, or else they should die and atone. Before they could run, Gray swiftly decapitated both of the mercenaries, claiming that this action was to help compensate for their actions. Gray wiped off the blood that splattered on his cheek, reminding himself that he wouldn't show mercy to his enemies, or else it would lead to them coming after him later, and lead him to failing to discern what he needed to protect. The bishop was even more frantic, watching the last of his mercenaries get killed, as he tried to desperately beg for his life. The dark-haired male didn't flinch from the words, saying that he was not the one the bishop should be praying to, and that God must be tired of waiting. Suddenly, the tension was interrupted by Halsaria calling for Gray's attention, telling him that she wanted to give the bishop a certain item before he would die. With that, the archer girl gave the male a handful of necklaces taken from the now-dead mercenaries. She dropped them into his hands, asking him to confirm if he had teleportation stones, which shocked him by the question, as he was already reaching out his arms to the items, which made it seem as though this was a trap. Knowing that these stones needed one's physical contact, Gray sliced off the arm of the bishop that was holding said stones. They tumbled onto the ground out of the bishop's hand, implying that he was likely going to use them, if it weren't for the distraction from Halsaria. These stones did exactly as their name would suggest, but they were not the greatest to use due to their expensive quality and ability to only teleport about 2 kilometers. The bishop held at his bleeding shoulder, heaving for breath while attempting to heal himself. But Gray scoffed and readied his blade again, to which the bishop tried to plead again until it was too late. The decapitated head rolled across the ground as Gray turned to call for Aless to quit pretending to be unconscious. The said boy sat up with a gloomy yet monotonous face. Gray wanted to ask him some questions, starting off with his age, which was mentioned to be the same as Ariamel's, even if Aless didn't seem too confident, due to living in an orphanage previously. The dark-haired male hummed in confusion at the response, but Aless came from an orphanage all the way from the other side of Storia. Gray wondered why a kid from Codarl was in Storia, to which Aless explained that a group who claimed to be emissaries of Holy Storia arrived at the orphanage when they wished to take Aless with them, as he was the supposed hero. Aless didn't immediately refuse, but wanted his friends to come with him. However, the bishop claimed that was not possible, and that Storia would look after everyone. He grinned and explained that Aless would be taken by force anyway, so the boy was conflicted. Hearing one of the other orphans call out to him with tears in her eyes, Aless gazed with guilt, wondering if the group would keep their promise, but knew that his refusal would make a worse situation. With that, the boy agreed, and was told to promise to never say his location of origin, and to respond with Storia if asked, or else something bad would happen. It seemed as though Aless didn't have to worry about the threat given the death of the bishop, letting the boy also reveal that the group's plan was to bring back the saintess chosen by the oracle. He was worried that Ariamel would end up the same as him, and Gray hummed in acknowledgement before asking how well the boy could fight. Aless said that he was stronger than average, but could not fight against a knight such as Londi, causing Gray to glance over in disbelief at how Londi was a holy knight, since Holy Storia's holy knights were famous everywhere. Setting that aside, Gray had to do something about Aless, since his emotions wanted him to send the boy home instead of killing him. Halsaria yawned in the background, complaining about her fatigue, which made Gray decide that they should rest for the night. This would give Gray time to consult with the other kids before allowing Aless to stay with them, but just before leaving, the dark-haired male started to loot the corpses. Halsaria complained monotonously, irking Gray with confusion since he didn't see a problem taking things that corpses wouldn't use, along with it not being wrong to steal from bandits. The archer hummed and remembered that money would be needed to send Aless back home, to which Gray told her that she didn't need to speak if she understood his actions. Continuing to loot the corpses, he approached the teleportation stones, picking them up and using them on the corpses, so goblins or any other nearby monsters could take care of the cleanup. A sudden flash appeared for a second as the bodies disappeared, letting that be the final thing before the group would return. Gray knew that there would likely not be an outroar, or that Storia couldn't make a big deal about the situation or deaths, since the authorities were likely not informed given the group's behavior of sneaking about. Halsaria was told to meet up with Amelia and the others, leaving Gray to bring Aless to the inn, where he explained the story to the innkeeper, and had the older male let Aless stay there. The innkeeper attempted to rope Gray into a casual night where they would drink together, but Gray ignored him and showed the boy to his room, to which Aless spoke up to thank Gray for the action. He wanted to pay the dark-haired male back, but Gray refused and said it wasn't needed, closing the door and letting out a sigh from all that happened that day. The next day, Gray would arrive to meet up with some of the Valkyries, being greeted by Halsaria, who already told everyone about what happened. He thanked the woman, turning to Amelia, who had her arms crossed and an expression of slight disbelief. Amelia sighed and said that these actions, such as saving the hero, were qualities of Gray that never seemed to change, surprising Gray as he expected her to get mad. She asked what he was planning to do with the hero, to which he would consult the kids to let him personally stay with them for the time being, until he would find out information about Alessa's hometown. Amelia hummed in acknowledgement, offering support if he would ask it of them, but it seemed as though the woman was not ready to hear Gray thank her and apologize for troubling her, the words and his smile causing her to fluster. She stuttered and tried to reassure Gray that there was no need as they were friends, but Gray attempted to suggest that they should go inside to talk more. The dark-haired male got confused when Amelia would become even more flushed and sheepish, not able to do what she wanted to do. She was told to clear a supposed hurdle of hers. However, Amelia couldn't handle it, and started to briskly walk off without any explanation. The other two women seemed to know what this was about, one wanting to have a strategy meeting, but Halsaria didn't believe that Amelia would pull through anyway. They said their goodbyes to Gray and walked off with their leader, letting Gray enter the house and notice Ariamel on the couch. He approached the girl and was confused by her unconscious state, seeing her distressed, which made him wonder if she was having a nightmare, even if he couldn't do much to help with that. Ariamel seemed to be standing in a dark and cold environment that was unrecognizable, confusing her as she looked around. She wanted to hurry home, as she remembered how the younger children were likely hungry, causing Ariamel to worry if there was any food to even eat while she was gone. As the oldest, the girl felt the need to always be put together, but she didn't even know how to exit the void. It seemed as though the environment changed, shocking her when she was forced to witness and remember the previous shack that she lived in and experienced its destruction. Her parents had died, but she also eventually met the others and started a new life despite the lack of money or food. It felt warm and happy to support each other, but it was as if there was nothing left anymore. This state of unconsciousness turned darker, making Ariamel witness a scene of people breaking in, which was a mix of the events in the game and what would have happened in reality if Gray hadn't been how he was now. Nina was grabbed during this instance, and Ariamel would try to stop the men, even if she didn't have much success. Lutz joined in, however that led to him getting kicked away and collapsing to the ground with a bloody head. Ariamel was roughly grabbed by one of the men, being told she was a slave from now on. They would chain her and whip her and do other such horrible things despite her clear emotions of suffering, eventually being turned into a mindless husk. She would be told that she was the saintess and that Aless was the hero, but despite her state, she would be filled with confusion, as the people who owned her as a slave would apologize as if it never happened. Words of her disbelief and shock would chant repeatedly within her as tears fell down her face, leading to Ariamel cackling loudly and wishing for everyone to die as it showed her insanity. Those were the last words before Ariamel would die by stabbing herself, dying with the guilt of not being able to protect the others. The girl wallowed in her despair and held her body, noticing how cold it was and wishing for someone to sate her loneliness. A warmth enveloped the area and confused her, making Ariamel wonder if her parents were coming for her, but she awoke to Gray holding her. He asked about her dream, but she didn't seem to remember. Gray dismissed it and explained that he was bringing her to bed. It seemed as though she wanted to say something when he got home, making him hum with curiosity and confusion, until Ariamel proceeded to smile and welcome him home. Gray froze up, the simple words shocking him, as he remembered his depressing past life where he would never come home to people in the house. He didn't want to remember this past, but he didn't want to forget it, and the random moments that almost seemed small. The trifles, the silly things, the precious things, the warmth. Even if no one was there to respond, Gray would always return and say things that implied for someone to respond. And that was it. This whole time, Gray just wanted a family. And so the dark-haired male said the greeting back, causing Ariamel to smile happily, as Gray knew that he wanted to continue being a family with these kids. As Gray made his way up the stairs with Ariamel still lying in his arms, the girl asked if she could sleep in his room that night, explaining that the other kids were already gathered there. He walked in as quietly as he could, approaching the bed and placing Ariamel atop the mattress next to the others. She thanked him and became more drowsy, wishing for him to join wherever there was room, only for her words to fade off as she fell asleep. Gray stared at the bed, observing how it was likely too small for all 7 of them, so he wondered if he could buy a larger bed in order to have him be comfortable while letting this situation happen whenever it was needed. An idea appeared in his mind, where he could just let the smaller children use him as a bed, but his thoughts were interrupted by the small Nina who tugged at his pants and sleepily requested for him to bring her to the bathroom. Without any panic nor haste, the dark-haired male swiftly picked up the girl and brought her to the bathroom. After she was done, the male praised her, only to find her wishing to be picked up again. Gray lifted up the girl into his arms, patting her until she quickly fell back asleep. He came back into the room, realizing that Stella was awake as well, and asking for the same request as Nina did. With even more swift movement and silence, Gray placed Nina back into the bed and grabbed Stella to do the same. The dark-haired male was about to leave until he remembered who was likely going to be next. Glancing back to where Lutz was fidgeting in place, Gray tried to reassure the boy that he would be back soon, but he couldn't finish his sentence, as Lutz seemed to not have been able to hold it in. The small boy started to cry over the accident, to which Gray tried to reassure him, tossing away the pants and giving Lutz a new pair. Despite the repeated coups, Lutz continued to cry as Stella joined in, but Gray wondered how he would get through to a crying child. However, he couldn't do much more or else it would confuse the child. Lutz eventually calmed down and was back asleep with Gray and Stella in the bed as well. but the dark-haired male knew that he had to leave soon, since he needed to clean Lutz's pajamas. Gray found a way to escape, and started to wash the piece of clothing until morning, surprising the male with how long it took him. He was exhausted, but knew that attempting to sleep now would lead him to falling prey to the mischief of Nina and the others, so Gray wanted to make sure he would do anything to prevent such an exhausting situation from accompanying his fatigue. How did that go? It still happened. Gray knew that it would happen, but he still seemed to risk the attempt, or was too sleepy to truly find a solution that would benefit his need for rest. Not too long after entering his room and laying on the mattress, Nina and Stella would enter the room after getting ready, and would jump up to shake the sleeping man. Nina would excitedly call out to Gray to let him know about breakfast, while Stella would mention how Aria was calling out to him, insisting that he should get up, and pinching at the skin of his face without any remorse. Despite the exhaustion clear in his drowsy voice, Gray knew that he couldn't complain much about the situation, as he had done nothing to save himself, nor attempt to have time to himself due to his emotions drawing him to be around the children. With that, the dark-haired male grumbled under his breath, flinching from the pain of Stella's actions, as he mumbled about how he was getting up, in hopes that Stella would stop.